That is the question. What's up, Financial Zen Masters? It's Rick. The question we get time and time again, and the one that you've asked yourself many times and probably still don't have an answer to, is how much money do you need to be able to retire? How much do you need in the pot before you can achieve financial zen and get out of the rat race, quit your 9 to 5, and go pursue your passions? That is a question. I'm going to give you that answer today. Welcome to the Financial Zen channel. I'm your host and guide, Rick Valenzi. The big question is, how do you, a super successful working professional with kids at home and a mortgage to pay, how do you quit your 9 to 5 so you can go pursue your passions while still providing for your family? That requires a high level of financial zen, and that is what I look to provide for you on this channel. So the question, how much do you need to retire, right? That's the burning question. How much do we need? And I'm sure you've looked into this in some various form, one way or another, but the answer is really simple. You need to remember one number. 5%. That's it. That's the magic sauce. So what do I mean by 5%? So the backstory, quick backstory on this before we get to the how's and why's this works, is so I got into the business, and like so many other financial advisors, I started working with retirees because I was working at this brokerage firm, and the only way that they allowed you to charge your clients is a percentage of the fees on assets, right? So if you had $1 million and I charged you 1%, then you pay me $10,000 per year, right? That's the only option at the big brokerage firms. And so as a result of that, it kind of forces you to work with retirees who have their millions of dollars. Now, one of the reasons why I launched Financial Zen when I left that brokerage firm is because I saw this massive need for people that don't have $1 million yet, that are just earning a bunch and on their way to that, but need help along the way to get there and get there that much faster. And so that's why we work with young families. That's why we have a completely different fee structure and pricing model, so that we don't need you to have $1 million for us to be profitable, right? Anyways, that's another story for another time. So I went to Wells Fargo and I was working with all these retirees, and part of the deal was, the brokerage industry up until that point was always very focused on like accumulating money, right? So you collect everybody's money so you can charge them fees, and then the brokerage company gets their 70% cut, right? So they're really very interested in the accumulation phase, but there's very little education or training or anything else around the distribution phase, meaning like, okay, you saved all this money, you go retire, now you got to live off this money. How do you structure it, right? So the extent of the details of how far this industry gets into that is the 4% rule. So instead of 5%, you need 4%. What that means is you could withdraw 4% of your money on a sustainable basis. So if you had $1 million, you could withdraw 4% of that, which is 40 grand a year, and probably be okay. The problem was with all these products was they were investment products, so it was like an insurance thing, or it was some type of mutual fund or some type of service. And basically the problem, which we'll get into here in a second, was that money ebbed and flowed with the market. So if you start withdrawing 4% right out of the gates and the market tanks, and your portfolio is now down from $1 million to $800,000, let's say, at a 20% drop in 1 year, now you're collecting 4% off of 80 grand. So the question is, do you collect 4% of 80 grand, which is now 32,000 instead of your 40,000, or do you keep withdrawing 40 grand, right, which was your old 4% number, right? But now you're actually withdrawing more like 5%, right? So the question, just what the industry is currently doing was not enough for me. And so I did the Rick Valenzi thing, and I came up with my own system, which I've used time and time again over the last 13 years. It works beautifully. I've back tested it on different market conditions, depending on various things. And magic sauce, and the reason why it works, which I'll explain in a minute, is because it takes out needing to withdraw down from a down portfolio to meet your needs, right? So instead of 4%, we can get you 5%. Now, what does that mean for you? Now, as a young, successful professional with kids at home and thinking that you're probably very far from retirement, what this means for you is very simple. You need to take your living expenses to figure out how much you need in retirement. Here comes the big reveal. You take your living expenses and divide it by 0.05, right? So to make the math simple, if your living expenses is 100 grand a year, it's probably more than that. I get it, right? You're a young family, probably Bay Area kids. But to make the math simple, you get $100,000 in living expenses. You divide that by 5%. Okay, that equals $2 million. Boom. You spend 100 grand a year. If you want to make 100 grand a year off of your savings and investment portfolio, you divide that by 0.5%, which is the sustainable withdrawal rate that I can get you, and that means you need $2 million in the bank. Okay, so now how does this work? I'll give you a slight clue. It's not terribly complicated. But it also requires a bit more training and education than I could give you here in a 5-minute YouTube video. So the way you do it is, and the magic sauce behind the way that we structure our retirement distribution strategy is you bucket your money, right? So you get one bucket. Excuse me, you got two different buckets. Okay, bucket one, bucket two. Okay. And you put half of your money in bucket one, put your half of your money in bucket two. What is bucket one? Bucket one is bonds and cash. That's your safe money. Bucket two is your growing money in the market. Okay? The way it works is if you got $1 million, if you have that $2 million, you put $1 million into bucket one, okay? And you structure it into what's called a bond ladder, where you buy bonds. The way bonds work is you loan a company your money, or a government entity your money. They'll pay you interest along the way, and then they'll give you your principal back at the end of the term, right? And it could be any term from 6 months from now, 3 months from now, to 30 years from now, right? So you do that, and you structure it so you have one living expenses maturing in each of the next 10 years. So you have 10 years, 100 grand into 10 years bonds, a 10-year bond ladder, right, which comes due, which matures in bond speak each year, right? So you know where your living expenses are coming from, right? So your living expenses are coming from the safe money. And then you have the rest of the money in bucket two, which is invested in a nice, well-diversified index portfolio, right? Which you do have already, right, for your serious money. And this should grow depending on your risk tolerance and how you have it invested. Let's call it 10% per year, right? So this grows at 10% per year. Let's say in a normal year, you would draw 100 grand from here. You made 10% in the other $1 million that's here. So that's 100 grand, right? So that 100 grand comes out of this bucket. And when that comes out of this bucket, you lob off 100 grand from here and throw it into there. And then what happens, the magic sauce is when the market tanks, you don't have to withdraw money from a down portfolio, which is a bad thing to do, right? So let's say this year you withdraw 100 grand from your bucket one, and the market's not so good. Market's down 20%. Well, we don't want to withdraw on a portfolio that's down, right? We want to keep all the money in the bucket so that when the market rebounds, because it always does, we have everything in there to rebound with it, right? So we just don't replace it. So instead of having 10 years over here, now you have 9 years, right? Let's say it happens 3 more years. You go down, you only have 7 years in bucket one, right? But next thing you know, if you've had 3 down years, the market's really going to take off. So eventually this is going to be overflowing, and you take the overflow and pour it into bucket one. So that's the magic sauce. Again, we get into obviously much more detail than that, but that's sort of the very high level strategy of how you can get 5% in your portfolio. So the answer to your question is, how much do I need to retire? First, you got to know your living expenses, and that includes everything, right? So you got to know what your burn rate is, and then once you know your burn rate, divide it by 0.5, and that's your financial Zen number. That's what we call the financial Zen number, the number you need, the amount of money that you need to live off of your savings sustainably for the rest of eternity, come hell or high water, no matter what happens in the world, in politics, and the markets. Okay, so that's how much you need to retire. Learn it, love it. Subscribe down below for more stuff like this, to answer answers to all the other burning questions I'm sure you've had along the way, and let me know what other questions you have too down in the comments. All right, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.